Look, significant stuff this week, and I'm not at Parliament, and I'm not talking about the continued cabaret of outrage that the Māori Party participate in, burning bills, wearing weird stuff, fighting amongst themselves. I'm talking about the changes that have been passed into law and the clarification of our laws around customary title on the coastline, the Marine and Coastal Area Act. And I just want to give a quick synopsis. I think this is right. I think it was way back, maybe even at the time of Jim Bolger. The government said, look, if you could claim customary use or some right to a piece of the coastline if you can prove that going way back to the Treaty of Waitangi you had uninterrupted customary use. That gives you some rights. It was very specific, but then the judges and our courts reinterpreted what customary rights meant, and it opened almost the entire coastline to being claimed by Māori groups under those auspices. It was a classic example, like the gang patches being given back, like the Broadcasting Standards Authority saying it's the boss of me, of judges or semi-judicial bodies taking upon themselves to change the law in ways that Parliament never intended. And it was good this week to see our Parliament exercise democracy, represent the will of the people, and put the very reasonable limits around customary title claims clearly into the law in black and white so that woke judges couldn't mess with it. But will this stick? Will it last? To discuss that, we're joined now by someone who I'm sure welcomed this week's development, Muriel Newman, former ACT MP and head of the Centre for Political Research. Muriel, lovely to have you with us again. Good morning.
Good morning, Sean. Thank you.
Look, I see all the normal Liberals, Peter Dunn, Finlayson, Māori activists, Annette Sykes, veteran Māori activist slams new marine title bill. It must be a good thing if people like that are angry about it.
Look, the government or the coalition was very clear that what they wanted to do was to restore the meaning to the law that Parliament intended. And you're right in what you said earlier, that the law was set out, and what the courts did was that they misinterpreted the law dreadfully.
Or deliberately?
And so, deliberately and dreadfully. Yeah, it was a terrible, terrible outcome, because the whole point about the law was that there was meant to be an element of tikanga in it, where, customary use and just the whole custom thing.
That mumbo-jumbo, Muriel.
Yes, that's right. Where that, had a place. But what they did was that they interpreted the whole law through a tikanga lens. And, of course, what that meant is that, oh, yes, they own the whole lot and, the whole coast. And that's where we were heading. We were heading for the whole of New Zealand's coastline and territorial sea being awarded to Maori customary rights, which means that Maori would have control of it. And they'd have all the minerals. They'd have ownership of all our rare earths and everything else, and the freedom to do whatever they wanted with it, like do deals with China or whatever. And so it was like a huge red flag. And fortunately, the coalition saw that, and they've now changed the law, and they think they've changed it so that the courts will have to interpret it as Parliament intended, which was only that areas that are remote and have been, in tribal sort of ownership for forever would be able to be claimed. In other words, about 10%, they reckoned, back at the time when the law was passed, no more than 10% of the coastline would ever go into customary marine title. And so we have to wait and see. We don't have a good feeling about this. We think that the judges will find a way around it, and we'll end up back in the same place in a few years' time.
Look, the problem is we've also got Labor now saying they will repeal this law. They haven't told us with what urgency, but we then end up in this pendulum swinging back and forth on this issue, don't we, Muriel?
Oh, yes, it's a dreadful, dreadful thing because if you remember, the whole controversy was started when the Court of Appeal under Sean Elias suggested that some pockets of customary marine title might exist. Now, that was pockets, discrete areas, not the whole flipping coast. And so, and what happened back then, that was 2003, and there was a flood of claims, hundreds of claims for the whole coast flooded in, and so Labor was the ones that restored Crown ownership under the Foreshore and Seabed Act. And so they took it all back into Crown ownership as it had always been since, 1840. And it was national under a coalition deal with the Maori Party that repealed Crown ownership and set up the Marine and Coastal Area Act, which Labor opposed. So Labor brought in the Foreshore and Seabed Act. They opposed the Marine and Coastal Area Act. And now what they're saying is that they are going to repeal the tightening of the Act and set it all open so the whole coast can be owned by Maori. It's a terrible thing. And look, Sean, the only answer to all of this, because you've got to remember that the whole adversarial court process is based on essentially one group saying we own this patch of coast and another group fronting up in court and saying, no, you don't. And here's the evidence. So when it was set up, everyone thought, well, Maori would claim the coast, locals would form groups who would then oppose them. But of course, what Chris Finlayson did was he set it so there's about $500,000 worth of funding for the claimants, nothing for the opponents. And so there is no opposition. So it's an adversarial process with no opposition, which means the whole flipping thing is flawed from the get-go. And the only answer in our mind is to repeal the whole blinking thing and go back to the Foreshore and Seabed Act where the Crown owns the area on behalf of all New Zealanders.
All right. Would you allow for tikanga in that, or do you just trust the Crown?
No way.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So you
no
say
way.
actually even these reforms, which, the wokesters are absolutely screaming blue murder about, you say it doesn't go far enough. It's just get rid of the Act.
Well, we were involved in the first claims that went through under the old Act, the Edwards case near Opotiki.
Yeah.
And we had to go through the High Court, the Court of Appeal, the Supreme Court. I mean, it actually costs an arm and a leg, and we were fortunate because we had people who supported the cause. Now, we're going to have to go back and do the same thing again, and I suspect every single case will end up going through the Court of Appeal, the High Court, the Court of Appeal, Supreme Court, and of course Justice Joe Williams, who was the tikanga advocate, is one of the key players in the Supreme Court. And, how can you expect anything different apart from the fact that it'll all be given back to iwi? And so we really have we've got a little bit of hope that the law might rein it all in, but not an awful lot, to be honest.
Jeez, okay, that's quite a depressing
I
scenario.
think that, and I think what's happened, of course, is back in the day when the Marine and Coastal Area Act was brought in, back in 2011, everybody was aware of it, and ACT had done a great job in Parliament at the time of opposing the law change, and so did Labor. So the opposition did a great job, and people were very much aware of what was going on and what was at stake.